I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Comer, from Kentucky, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Discovering the origins of COVID-19 is vital. It's vital to preparing for future pandemics and to save lives. Dr. Anderson, in your prepared testimony, you say that you're being investigated because, quote, published peer-reviewed studies that go against the preferred political narrative, end quote. Now that goes opposite to what we have seen. The preferred political narrative has always been to attack those that think this may have come from a lab. Your co-author says on the poster right behind me what the real political narrative is. Quote, given the shit show that would happen if anyone serious accused the Chinese of even accidental release. Dr. Anderson, you responded to this message, quote, yep, I totally agree, that's a very reasonable conclusion. Although I hate when politics is injected into science, but it's impossible not to, especially given the circumstance, end quote. Sir, do you have a degree in political science or international relations?
I do not.
Do you have any experience in the Foreign Service or diplomatic corps?
I do not. I'm a Danish citizen.
You are the one with the preferred political narrative. You said it right there. This preference was reiterated by Dr. Collins, saying that the lab leak theory would, quote, do great potential harm to science and international harmony, end quote. We heard at our last hearing that the Biden administration was working with social media companies to censor the lab leak theory. I think you have preferred political narratives backwards, sir. When was your first conversation with Dr. Fauci about the origins of COVID-19?
I believe that was on the 31st of January 2020.
And yes or no, he suggested you write a paper during that conversation, correct?
Dr. Fauci suggested that I consider writing a paper specifically predicated on my initial hypothesis, which was that of a lab-associated virus, correct?
Then you had the February 1st conference call that had Dr. Fauci, Dr. Collins, and Dr. Farrar on it, correct?
There were several scientists, including those, yes.
Was Dr. Tabak also on that call?
I believe he was on the call. I'm unsure about that.
Did Dr. Fauci reiterate a suggestion to draft a paper on that call?
I don't believe that he directly suggested it, but there was support for us looking further into the origin of the pandemic, yes.
Well, did the February 1st conference call lead to the drafting of proximal origin?
At the time, no. These are separate events. Eventually, the conclusions from that conference call, further conversations among the authors, ultimately led up in the March 17, 2020 paper, The Proximal Origin. However, the purpose of that conference call was not to write a paper.
But I want to shift to the conclusions of that paper. First, our analysis clearly show that SARS-CoV-2 is not a laboratory construct or purposefully manipulated virus. Dr. Anderson, do you stand by that statement?
I do.
Dr. Gary, do you stand by that statement?
I do.
Dr. Gary, are there research techniques that can purposefully manipulate a virus without leaving a trace?
There are.
What about having a virus be a laboratory construct without leaving a trace?
If I understand your question correctly, yes, I believe there are.
So you can't make that conclusion with certainty then?
We didn't base it on those facts, though, sir. It was other facts and other evidence that we gathered during the course of our investigation.
Well, you conclude that you do not believe that any type of laboratory-based scenario is plausible. Dr. Anderson, do you stand by that statement?
I do, and I think it's important to understand that when we're talking about a purposefully manipulated virus, specifically what we are referring to in the paper here, and as you will see from the record we have handed to the committee, is that we are talking about the idea of building this virus with the intent of creating this virus. For example, a bioweapon would be an example of this. The normal engineering of a virus, while I certainly believe that that is fully inconsistent with the evidence we have available to us is not specifically what we're talking about here. In a laboratory construct, we are talking about many of the different reverse genetic systems available for SARS-like coronavirus.
My last question. Dr. Gary, a recent interview you had saying that statement went too far. Did that statement go too far, and is a laboratory-based scenario for the origin of COVID-19 plausible?
So I said maybe we went too far, and I think in that particular statement that is really out of context with almost a 6-hour interview that I gave to a BBC reporter, we were talking again about the scientific method. And I'm simply just referring to the fact that we were early at the time in the analysis, and that yes, we would change our minds if other evidence, other data came forward to support another theory. So, a scientist that is 100% certain of their conclusions is not a very good scientist. You need to evaluate new data and go back, and that's all I was referring to in that sentence.
Mr. Chairman, my time's expired.